Chapter 2. I didn't need to open my eyes to know that I was inside a coach. It had been many years since I'd ridden in one, but the rocking sensation was unmistakable, as was the subtle scent of the leather seat on which I lay. My hands and feet were tied, and I lay on a bench seat, facing forward. My shoulder still hurt, but not as badly as before. It had popped back into the socket while I was unconscious. By luck, or by my captors? At least one of them was with me in the cabin. I could hear soft breathing and feel a gaze upon me. My hair still covered half my face, reaching past my nose. A small mercy. I wasn't expecting him to put up a fight. That was Pretty's cultured voice coming from the seat opposite. Unless he was talking to himself, there must be another beside him. Nobody answered. "The lad's got some fire in his belly," Pretty went on. He paused, yet there was still no response from his companion. I suspected it was the one they called Sir then, not Ugly. Ugly was more talkative. "Do you think he'll have answers?" "Some. Yes, definitely, sir." I recognized his rich, velvety tones. "Do you think he knows where she is?" She. Who is he talking about? "Perhaps," Sir said. Pretty grunted. "Think he'll tell us where to find her if he does?" "I'll see to it." A cold lump of dread lodged in the pit of my stomach. He had no qualms rendering me unconscious to capture me, so what methods would he employ to get answers? Answers to what? I didn't know the whereabouts of any missing women. Unless he meant me, Charlotte Holloway. If so, it seemed he hadn't connected Charlie the boy to Charlotte the missing girl. Yet. I needed to get away from him as soon as possible before he worked it out. With my hands and feet tied, escape was not going to be easy. The men didn't speak for some time, and the silence between them felt awkward. They weren't friends then, but more likely master and servant. A good 10 or 15 minutes passed before the leather seat creaked beneath the shifting weight of one of them. Pretty cleared his throat. "Odd that he hasn't woken up yet." "He's awake," Sir said. How had he known? The leather seat creaked again, and I felt warm breath on my chin. I opened my eyes, startling Pretty. "How long have you been awake?" he asked. I didn't answer. I didn't want him knowing I'd overheard their conversation. The man sitting beside him spoke instead. "Since we drove off." Sir was not what I expected. He was strikingly handsome, although he seemed to want to downplay his good looks. His black, wavy hair reached to his shoulders, a few errant strands spilling over one sharp cheek. No gentleman I'd ever seen kept his hair that length, or in such disarray. Nor was the hair on his face the latest fashion. Instead of being styled and oiled to a sheen, it shadowed his jaw, as if he'd forgotten to shave for 2 days. If he didn't wear such a fine, well-fitting suit, I would not have thought him a gentleman at all. He didn't even wear a hat or gloves. I sat up, which was not an easy task, trussed up as I was. Neither man assisted me. I shrank into the corner, then remembered I was trying to look defiant and unafraid. I tilted my chin and stared into Sir's black, black eyes. That was a mistake. He met my gaze with his own fiercely direct one, and I felt like I was being sucked into a well so endless it would take a lifetime to reach the bottom. He gave away nothing through his eyes, yet I felt he could see everything in mine. Surely he must know I was not who I claimed to be. I wanted to look away before he saw too much, but I could not. He was much too compelling. It was only because the carriage slowed that I was released. He glanced out the window, and my own gaze followed. We drove through a set of enormous iron gates spiked with spearhead finials, then along a drive. Lawn carpeted the landscape, the occasional tree or shrub interrupting the smooth surface. I craned my neck and finally caught a glimpse of our destination as we rounded a gentle bend. I gaped at the mansion. It sat atop a low rise like a crow with wings spread out in either direction. The building was a mad collection of shapes. Tall, narrow pinnacles shot from the centers of square towers, positioned between the triangular gables and rectangular chimneys. But it was the central tower that caught my attention. At almost twice the height of the rest of the house, it was an imposing entrance. Beneath the three cones at its crown was a small window, then nothing but dark stone plunging down to the large arched door. Rapunzel wouldn't look out of place in that high window, but it would take more than a lifetime for her hair to grow long enough to reach the ground. I recoiled and suppressed a shiver. Sir watched me with those all-seeing eyes of his. His expression remained cool, detached, unreadable. It was unlikely he cared what I thought about our destination, unless he could use that fear against me. "Is this Bedlam?" I asked. I could well imagine the mansion was the infamous insane asylum. It looked bleak enough to house those miserable mad people. People like me. Pretty snorted. An apt assessment, but no. The coach pulled to a stop, and Sir opened the door himself. No servants emerged from the house to do it for him. The cabin dipped as he stepped off, then dipped again as someone jumped down from the driver's seat. Ugly came into view beside Sir. "How's he going to walk up with his feet all bound up like that?" "You're going to carry him," Pretty said. Ugly looked to Sir, but he merely walked off. "Put him in the tower room," he said. "See that he's fed and bathed." "Don't just stand there, pizzlehead," Pretty signaled to Ugly. "Come get him." Ugly grimaced, revealing 2 rows of broken, jagged teeth. "Why don't you do it?" "Because I'm in charge, and the one in charge doesn't do any hard labor." "You're not in charge. Death is." Ugly jerked his head at the retreating figure of Sir. They called him Death behind his back, and Sir to his face. I wondered if he knew. "I'm second in command, and since he's no longer here, I am in charge. Grab the little blighter and get him up to the tower room." Ugly sighed and reached for me. I scooted along the seat into the back corner. "I'm covered in lice," I told him. Ugly scratched his bushy sideburns. "Do I have to touch him, Seth? Couldn't we just untie him and let him walk up? And risk him running off? I'd like to see you explain that to Death." Pretty, Seth, grabbed my arm and dragged me to the cabin door. Without warning, he shoved me into Ugly's waiting hands. The big man caught me easily. "You stink." I managed to dig my elbow into his ribs and received an oomph for my troubles. "Compared to your sweet smell, you mean?" Seth chuckled. "I think I'm going to like you, lad." "Don't get too attached to him." Ugly hoisted me under his arm and carried me toward the house like a roll of fabric. "Death'll get what he wants out of him, then send him back to the sewer." "What information is that?" I spat. "Stop moving," Ugly said. His arm tightened around me and I thought he'd cut me in half. "You're hurting me." I wriggled and kicked out with my bound legs, but connected with nothing but air. "Calm down, lad," Seth said. "Cooperate, and you will not be harmed. Fight, and it will not go well for you. Death doesn't like it when his orders aren't followed." "I don't have to follow his orders. He's not my master." "Yet he will get what he needs from you nevertheless. He's good at that." I gulped at his ominous tone as much as the promise in his words. I imagined the man they called Death extracting my real name from me with the use of medieval torture devices. He probably kept them in the dungeon. Surely a place as grim as the one we were now entering had a dungeon, with walls so thick that no one would hear my screams. "What are you shivering for, boy?" Ugly said, hoisting me higher on his hip. "It ain't cold." "This is uncomfortable," I told him. Can't you put me down and let me walk? No, Seth said. Where are we? Litchfield Towers. Are we still in London? Yes, Highgate. I knew Highgate had some big homes, but estates of the scale of this one weren't common. I could picture only two that I knew of, both behind high fences and rows of trees. Now that I thought about it, the front gate had looked familiar. We weren't too far from the cemetery. Knowing my location buoyed me somewhat. If I did escape, finding my way back to Clerkenwell wouldn't be too difficult. The first thing I'd do when I returned to our basement hell would be gather my belongings and find a new place to live, somewhere where nobody knew me, somewhere far away from Stringer and his gang. I got to see very little of my surroundings, facing downward as I was. The floor tiles in the entrance hall were mostly covered by a crimson oriental rug, and the walls were panelled in dark wood. Ugly carried me up a grand staircase, his footfalls deadened by a carpet runner. Despite being daytime, the lack of windows meant it was dark in the stairwell without the chandelier lit. We continued up and up, Seth following behind us. We passed many doors, all closed, until we finally reached what must have been the highest room in the central tower. Seth slipped past us and pushed open the door. The room was larger than I expected, with more furniture than I'd seen in one place for a long time. Still, it was bare compared to my childhood room in Tufnell Park. It contained only a small bed, a dresser, table, and chair. There were no knickknacks on the table or dresser, no pictures adorning the deep red walls, and the bedspread was plain grey. Yet I loved the room. Once Ugly and Seth left, I would be alone inside four walls for the first time in an age. It was a luxury I'd feared never to experience again. Not that I would experience it for long this time. If I could tie together the sheets and blankets, I wouldn't need Rapunzel's hair. I could simply attach one end to the bed and climb out the window. I glanced at the window and bit my lip. Perhaps not. It was a long way down. Ugly dropped me onto the bed. I bounced on the mattress and had to suppress a smile before they saw it. The mattress was soft. How are we supposed to bathe him up here? Ugly said. I don't need a bath. Smelled yourself lately? Seth looked me over, and I made sure to keep my face dipped so that my hair hid it. You stink worse than Gus. Oi! Gus protested. I ain't that bad. Besides, our orders are to get you bathed. My face flushed, and I was glad my hair covered it. My filth was a foolish thing to be ashamed of, but I couldn't help it. My mother had been a stickler for cleanliness, scrubbing my skin with carbolic soap and my fingernails with a slice of lemon every day. She would have a fit if she saw the grime that had been deeply ingrained into my nails and skin now. Fetch a washstand and a bowl of water. Ugly, Gus said. It won't be enough, Seth said. The water will be black before he's even half clean. Take him to the bathroom and fill up the tub. The bathroom's 2 levels down. Besides, Death didn't tell us to take him to the bathroom. He said to bring him here. Then what'll we do? A jug of water and a bowl will do me well enough, I said, sitting up. There's no need to bother with a bath. Seth jerked his head at Gus. You get it. I'll strip those rags off him. No! They both blinked at my vehemence. Why not? Gus asked. You ain't got nothing we ain't seen before. Only smaller. He chuckled as his gaze focused on my crotch. You'll be perfectly safe with us, Seth said, somewhat soothingly. Neither of us care what you look like. They would if they knew I looked like a girl. I've got scars. I don't like folks seeing them. Me too. Gus began to unbutton his jacket. I'll show you mine first. Ain't no reason to hide scars. Shows you're a fighter. Or careless in your case. Seth's eyes gleamed with humour. I almost found myself smiling along with him. Weren't my fault. The water got spilled. Gus didn't continue to unbutton his jacket, nor did he do them up again. No, but it was your fault there was still hot water in the pot. You were supposed to empty it. Gus gave Seth a rude hand gesture. Seth ignored him and bent to untie me. Guard the door, he told Gus. Gus did. He was a solid man, a wall of brawn that I would never get past without a distraction. Don't think about running off, Seth said. Death will get you before you even leave the house. I tilted my chin. How will he know I've escaped? He'll know. He knows everything. That's how we found you. Death's a machine, Gus chimed in. And like God, too. A God machine. Don't push him or he'll come down on you like a ton of Bibles. He probably knows you just said that, Seth said with a wink at me. Gus swallowed heavily and glanced around the ceiling as if looking for the God machine himself up there. With my hands and ankles finally free, I felt more human. I stood and walked around the room, checking the drawers in the dresser, they were empty, and looking out the window. Definitely too far to climb down. Go get the water, Seth said. I'll fetch him something to eat. Gus narrowed his eyes at me. He'll escape. Seth grinned and pulled a key out of his waistcoat pocket. Now why would he want to leave this comfortable room and return to the sewers anyway? I didn't live in the sewers, I growled at him. You lived in a cramped, dark cellar that stank like a sewer. You're better off here, lad, don't forget it. Do I have my freedom here? I snapped. Can I come and go as I please? No? Doesn't seem like I'm better off. Seth's mouth flattened into a sympathetic grimace. Gus shook his head and opened the door. The two of them filed out and quickly shut it again. The lock tumbled, and I was left alone. I suddenly felt weary to the bone. I stared at the bed, so soft and inviting. The pillow was pumped too, like a cloud. But it was too clean for the likes of me. I didn't want to get any lice on it. Same with the chair. It was upholstered in nice brocade fabric, patterned with grey and crimson flowers. I stood by the window instead and looked out upon the garden and lawn. Large trees rimmed the edge of the property, and beyond that I could see buildings in one direction and parkland in another. It was a lovely vista, and one I could have happily stared at. Yet my stomach wouldn't let me enjoy the view. It churned with worry. The last time I'd been locked away had been the morning before, and men had tried to rape me in the police cell. While I didn't think Death and his men had that in store for me, their reasons for abducting me couldn't be good. Nothing associated with my reanimation of dead bodies had turned out to be good on the 2 occasions I'd done it. The first time, I'd been thrown out of my house by my father, and the second time, scary people came looking for me. First the doctor, then Death. I sank down onto the floor and drew my knees up to my chest. I had a sickening feeling that I wouldn't be going anywhere for a long time. Death visited me after I'd washed and eaten. Seth and Gus allowed me to bathe in private when I asked to be left alone. Still, I didn't undress entirely, nor did I put on the clean clothes provided for me. For one thing, the trousers and shirt were too big. For another, I didn't want to get comfortable at Litchfield Towers. If I succumbed to the comforts, I might never want to leave. And I had to leave. Death had something in store for me, the reanimator of corpses. Something I suspected I wanted no part of. He stood with his back to the closed door, arms folded across his chest. He dispensed with jacket, tie, and waistcoat, and the informality made him seem less like a gentleman and more like a wastrel. Indeed, his dark, dishevelled looks wouldn't have been out of place on a carnival gypsy. "What's your name?" he asked me. I scowled at him from my position by the window. I'd not yet sat down on the chair, since I hadn't changed out of my filthy clothing, and I stood with my arms crossed over my chest too. "They called you Charlie." I wish I'd gone by a name that wasn't so close to Charlotte. Fortunately, Death didn't seem to notice the similarity. Perhaps I'd been mistaken and he wasn't looking for me, Charlotte Holloway, after all, but another girl that he thought I knew. "My name is Lincoln Fitzroy," he went on. "I thought it was Death." I didn't care if my retort got Seth and Gus into trouble. They were nothing to me. One corner of Fitzroy's mouth twitched in what would have been a smile on anyone else. On him, it was probably just a twitch. His face didn't lighten in any other way, but remained stern. I wondered if the man ever smiled or laughed. I doubted it. "Are you going to kill me, Mr. Death?" "That would be foolish, since I want answers from you." "And if I refuse to answer, will you kill me then?" "Have I given any indication that I would?" "You nearly killed me when you kidnapped me." "You were not in danger." "I fainted from lack of air. How could you have known I wouldn't die?" "Ladies faint all the time and do not die." I recoiled. Did he suspect? I dipped my head to ensure my face remained covered by my hair. "I am not a lady." "Clearly." He came toward me and regarded me levelly. "I know how long a person your size can be deprived of air before death takes him." "How do you know? Trial and error." He lifted a hand. I ducked out of his reach and put my arms up to shield my face. "I only want to get a better look at your face," he said. That was precisely why I darted away, but I realized my action could have been mistaken for fear that he'd hit me. "This ain't right," I told him. "You can't keep me here." "Who will stop me?" He shrugged one shoulder. "Nobody will look for you. Your friends gave you up for a few coins. You have no family, no one to worry about you. For all the world cares, you might as well not exist, Charlie whoever you are." Tears burned the backs of my eyes. He was right, but hearing it put so boldly stung. I was truly alone. Not a single soul cared whether I lived or died. Except me. Sometimes I wasn't even sure why I did care. It wasn't as if I was adding value to society. Even the blonde man whose spirit had saved me in the cell had left behind a reputation for defending the weak from bullies. The only impression I would leave behind would be my freakish way of communicating with the dead. "Tell me how you did it," Fitzroy said. "I don't know what you're on about, and I don't want to know. Let me go, I don't want to be here." His gaze flicked to the clothes still folded on the bed and the food I'd left largely untouched. I'd nibbled at the bread and cheese, but the butterflies fluttering in my stomach wouldn't let me eat more. "Is there something else you desire?" "My freedom." He waited, as if he expected me to add something of a material nature that he could command Seth or Gus to deliver to my room. "I will grant you your freedom when you tell me how you became a necromancer." Necromancer? Was that the name for me? It was quite an improvement over Devil's Daughter. "I don't know nothing about necromancing." I clenched my jaw, folded my arms, and sat on the floor. After a moment, he crouched by my side. I'd not heard his approach. The man was light on his feet. Even more surprising was that he had no smell, no hint of any soap or hair oil, no body odor, nothing. It was the oddest thing, and more unnerving than his quiet step. "There is another who can bring the dead back to life," he said. "A young woman of 18. Are you related to her?" "I don't know no women, and I ain't related to nobody." I hugged my knees and pressed my forehead against them. "I don't know anything about bringing dead bodies back to life, neither." Another long pause, then. "Where are you from?" I didn't answer. "How long have you lived on the street?" I hugged my knees tighter. He didn't go on, and when I glanced up, I saw that he'd moved away. He watched me from the window, his arms once more crossed. The window was on the opposite side of the room to the door that he'd left unlocked. He saved you, didn't he? Fitzroy didn't pose it as a question. The prisoners were going to hurt you, but the spirit frightened them off by re-entering his body. At your command. If he knew that much already, what else did he know? How did you do it? I snorted. You got the wrong boy. No. I don't know what you're talking about. You do. He said it with the utmost conviction that I knew I could never get him to doubt himself. Is it something you've always been able to do? You're a tosspot, he grunted. I expect a gutter dweller to come up with something more offensive than that. A fucking tosspot. Better. Now answer my question. He leaned a hip and shoulder against the wall and glanced out the window. A small frown connected his brows. His distraction gave me the opportunity I needed. I sprang up and sprinted for the door. But he reached it first. His palm slammed against the wood at my head height, the sound reverberating around the tower room. I watched him through the curtain of my hair, searching for signs that he would use that hand on me. His only movement was a small tightening of his lips. I have tried asking nicely, he said, in a voice that was much too calm. I have fed you and clothed you, provided a soft bed for you. I need none of that. It was a bold thing to say, considering the man's nickname was Death. But while I was the person with answers, he wouldn't kill me. That didn't mean he wouldn't hurt me. He straightened to his full height, an impressive size, not as tall or broad as Gus, but big, nevertheless. It would be easy for him to beat me senseless, or break my bones. I shrank away from him, regretting my impulsive actions and words. It might be wiser to bite my tongue in future. Then what do you need? He said. I glanced at the door. You will be worse off out there than in here. I shrugged a shoulder. His black brows drew together and his gaze drilled into me. Who is out there for you? Who do you want to see again? My father. I edged away from him and sat on the floor again, my back to the wall. I pulled up my knees and curled into the tightest, smallest ball possible. He watched me from beneath that severe brow. His anger seemed to have dissolved somewhat, but I still didn't trust him. He was too quick and too hard to read. He could haul me up by my shirt in a heartbeat and thrash the answers he sought out of me. A knock on the door made me jerk. Mr. Fitzroy, sir, said Seth from the other side. Lord Gillingham is here to see you. A lord? A real live lord was under the same roof as me? I suddenly wanted to look out the window and catch a glimpse of this lord's carriage and horses. I'd wager it was magnificent and the animals fine. Tell him I'm unavailable, Fitzroy said. Seth cleared his throat. He already knows you're in here talking to the boy. Gus told him, not me. I would not have known Fitzroy was irritated if it weren't for the curling of his right hand into a fist. His face remained unchanged from its glowering severity. Without a word, he opened the door and left. The lock clicked into place, and I was once more a prisoner and alone. I expelled a long breath and got up to look out the window. A gleaming black coach pulled by two greys was indeed waiting down below. I unlatched the window and pulled up the sash. You there! My loud whisper didn't so much as cause the horse's ears to twitch. You there! I called. The driver glanced around, but seeing no one, shook his head. Up here! He tilted his head back and touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgement. Help me! I am being held prisoner. Tell the... Not the police. They wanted me over the theft and escape. You must help me get out! The driver merely stared up at me. Then, with a shake of his head, He turned back to the horses. My heart sank. It was hopeless. He probably thought me a mischievous child having a lark. It would be impossible to convince him otherwise from such a distance. With a sigh, I picked up the wedge of cheese and bit off the corner. It tasted delicious, not like my usual fare of stale crumbs that even the rats turned their noses up at. I devoured the rest, shoveling it in, unable to eat fast enough. Then I promptly threw up in the corner. What a waste. I should have opened the window and deposited the contents of my guts on the front steps. That notion made me smile. The lock clicked in the door. Fitzroy must have finished his business with Lord Gillingham already and come to question me again. I steeled myself and took courage in the fact that he'd not yet hit me. But instead of my captor, another man entered. I guessed him to be about 40, with rust-coloured hair starting high on his forehead, and a short beard of a redder hue. He cut a fine form in a dark suit, with shoes polished to a high sheen, and a gold watch chain hanging from his waistcoat pocket. He clutched a walking stick in one hand, and I caught a glimpse of the tiger-shaped head as he adjusted his grip. It wasn't his clothing that told me he was Lord Gillingham, however, but his bearing. His body was ramrod straight, his mouth turned down in disapproval, and his head tilted back so that he looked down his nose at me, even though he wasn't very tall. Fitzroy may be a gentleman, but this man was a cut above, and he knew it. "Close the door," he said over his shoulder to Gus. Gus and Seth, standing in the hallway outside the room, frowned at one another. Then Gus closed the door. I was alone with the stranger. I debated whether I should bow to Lord Gillingham, nod, or take his hand. I was still trying to remember the proper etiquette for when a boy met a lord, and whether I wanted to conform when he spoke. "You are the child?" He sounded as if his mouth were full of strawberries that he didn't want to spill. It was quite ridiculous. I had to press my lips together to suppress a laugh. "Don't see no other in here, do you?" I said. "My lord." "Name's Charlie, but my lord will do just as well." I winked, warming to my bit of fun. Mimicking and mocking the upper classes had always been a popular pastime in the slums, no matter if it was Stringer's gang or any of the others I'd lived with over the years. Gillingham's wide nostrils flared, and his pale blue eyes flashed. "Do not play the fool with me." "Yes, my lord." Perhaps riling him wasn't a good idea when he could prove an ally. I knelt on the carpet and clutched my hands together. "Please, my lord, will you help me? The man named Fitzroy has kidnapped me and is keeping me prisoner here. Against my will," I added, when he gave no sign of concern or surprise. He stalked around the room, pinching his nose when he spotted my sick, then came back to stand in front of me. "He tells me you have not yet answered any of his questions." I went to stand, but he poked his walking stick into my shoulder. "Stay. I am not a dog," I spat. His top lip curled up. "No, a dog would do as his master bid and be thankful for what he's been given. People like you are fit only for picking up the shit of dogs." Charming fellow, although hearing shit said in his tough accent was quite amusing. Stringer and the others would laugh if I mimicked this conversation for them. "Where is the girl?" he asked. "I already told Mr. Fitzroy I don't know no girls. I ain't got no relatives, and I don't know what happened in no prison cell. My answers ain't changed." "Not yet." "Huh?" His top lip curled again, and he circled me slowly. He didn't lean on his stick, and I wondered why he carried it. It was part of his nobleman's image, I supposed, like the accent and sneer. "Fitzroy is too lenient this time," he said quietly, as if speaking to himself. "I do not pretend to understand why. When a good beating ought to produce answers, he rarely shows mercy, so why start now?" I gulped. Where is Mr. Fitzroy? I will ask the questions. Where are you from? Who are your parents? I swiveled to keep him in my sights. His face turned pink, then a mottled red, and his lips quivered. Answer me! I clenched my jaw and held the man's gaze with my own. I would not let him intimidate me. He might be a lord, but he wasn't my master. Buckingham Palace, and Her Majesty the Queen. I call her Mum. The walking stick smacked across my back. I arched forward and gasped as hot pain bloomed. I gathered my nerves and steadied my breathing to control the agony. If I let it rule me, I would give in, and I didn't want to give in to this man. I went to stand, but he shoved me so hard with his boot that I fell onto my side. I scrambled away, but he followed me, stick raised. Glacial eyes pinned me to the carpet as thoroughly as his boot did. I'll ask again, he snarled. Where are you from, and who are your parents? I hesitated, trying to think of the ramifications if I told him the truth about my Tufnell Park home and father. But I couldn't think. The fierce pumping of blood through my veins and the knot of anxiety in my stomach were playing havoc with my mind. He raised the stick again, and I braced myself. It cracked across my shoulder with bruising force. He raised it again, and I scampered further, only to hit the wall. Gillingham stalked toward me like a hunter tracking his prey. With a gleam in his eye, he brought the cane down on me again, and again, and again.